My name is Doug Frost. We are joined at the panel by some pretty august folks, and that doesn't mean they're old, although possibly. To my far left, Alexandre Gabriel, the distiller producer of Pierre Ferrand Cognac. Dave Pickerell, who doesn't make me have to roll my R's like that when I say his name, a legendary master distiller. And Ryan Maybee, who is from my town, Kansas City, barman extraordinaire with Manifesto and Rieger. So what we're up to is definitely, I'm going to beg you to indulge me and indulge us by providing us your palates, because you're in the midst of an experiment that we don't know where this ends, because you're in the midst of the experiment. The experiment is not done. You'll be tasting a work in progress or a couple of works in progress. It's amazing what drink will do for creativity. You know, in the ancient world, anytime a decision had to be made, the rule was everybody was to get roaring drunk, make the decision, then wake up the next day and decide if it was a good decision. Conversely, about half of the ancient civilized world would do quite the opposite. Make a decision, then get roaring drunk and go, that's the stupidest thing ever. Or maybe it's a good decision. So again, we need your assistance, and we don't care which state you're in. What we're going to do is ask of you to allow us to try to get to a few different goals. The goals are, one, of course, just to let these remarkable folks on stage talk about their views. We will have a chance, I think, to consider how, from a historical standpoint, how we went from a world in which brandy was the basis, brandy was the base, it was what was expected, to a world in which whiskey was the base. We won't talk about how we got to a world in which vodka was the base. Nonetheless, the great quote is Winston Churchill's, that my father drank brandy and soda, and I drink whiskey and soda. It is important, I think, to note he was not talking about drinking whiskey or brandy. He was talking about drinking a damned highball. So we're going to have cocktails in this as well. The experiment is really, let me tell you about it just a tiny bit, and then I'll turn it over to these guys to explain in greater detail. A couple of really interesting drinks. A rye whiskey from one of our finest distillers, and that has then been aged in cognac barrels. A cognac from one of the benchmark producers of cognac that has then been aged in rye whiskey barrels. Certainly there's some other stipulations in here, if you will, but it's going to give us an opportunity to ponder and sort of imagine what these treatments do to the aromas and the flavors. That's where you come in, okay? You are the aroma and flavor receptors, all right? It's your job to feed us what you think of that. First, I should turn the floor over, if I may, I'll turn it over first to Alexandre, because on your far left is marked clearly your Pierre Ferrand. It's the 1840 cognac, and then the third one over is now going to be that Pierre Ferrand experimental. But why don't we just start with the two products, the Pierre Ferrand and the WhistlePig, and why don't you just get started? Your thing.
Don't drink all of the sample yet.
Good
because
point.
I want you to nose the samples against the experimentals, so save some.
It is really indeed important that you start with a nosing. I know it's not a perfect glass for that, but you can find a nose in there, and there's something there that isn't necessarily going to be picked up, retronasally.
I am extremely excited to be here because I almost feel like it's a kinky experience. It's like we're going to do American whiskey and cognac together. I love research. I love creating new experiments for spirits, and I do a lot of historical research. And that's what led me to research about what cognac tasted like in the old days. Not the old days is not necessarily better, believe me. In the old days, there was a lot of, there's an English word, I think it's crap, right, made back then. There's a similar word in French, it's worse. Being a master distiller or being a master blender, I think you have to learn and to be very strong. I think Dave will agree with me with your classics before you go crazy and start being creatives. Well, with spirits, the magical thing is that if they're kept in good condition, meaning, by the way, always standing, never on the cork, you can actually taste these old spirits that were new, the way they were meant to be back then. And so that's what we did with the 1840, is really to recreate a cognac like it was blended in the 1800s. So that's what we're drinking today, the Pierre Ferrand 1840 original formula, and I hope you like it.
Wonderful, thank you. Dave Pickerell, take it away.
I'm honored to be with Alexandre because we're of a similar mindset. We both enjoy experimenting. He calls it experimenting, I call it playing. Where he's more into the historical side is what was it like, I'm more onto the what if. And so that's one of the reasons that I get so excited about being involved in this world, because we get the opportunity to go play and figure out how to do things different. WhistlePig is the beginning of one of those expressions. We saw it, with the rebirth of rye whiskey, and decided that that there was a place in the world for a really full-bodied whiskey, and we believed that American palates were beginning to swing back towards taste being important again. We're not going to use the V word. So everything that we did is double barrel aged to start with, and that's kind of the beginnings of finishing. So WhistlePig kind of is finished because it spends part of its life in a brand new barrel and part of its life in a once used barrel. We decided that we wanted to give it that full-bodied taste. I want you to go ahead and taste the WhistlePig.
Yeah, please do. What we need you to do, really, is see what you can tell us about these two. Now, I'll provide, if you will, the color commentary with regards to the cognac. For me, the 1840 has the sort of richness and expansiveness that one expected of cognac in those days. I would also have to say not necessarily the subtlety or the length of flavor. It's a little bit more of a fat impact and not necessarily as long an impact. And not to get too far down the rabbit hole in terms of cognac, I've been flipping some slides here so that we can see cognac is this delimited area comprised of subregions. Subregions have become very important. Certainly as we talk about a subregion like Grand Champagne with its very clear sort of limestone almost to chalk, and Petit Champagne with more of a mix of clay soils and all that, and Beaujolais, in which now we really get to soils that make a bigger, fatter style, and then all the other areas, which is on the tree. That process, the use of specific kinds of barrels, Limousin and Chancey, the use of double distilling and pot stills, each of these steps makes a very specific product. What you've seen here, or what I've attempted to put together here, is just sort of a spheres of influenza kind of look at what's making a difference. The oak choice in cognac makes a big difference. But in both cases, I always think that what we forget to talk about is time in oak. That the time in oak is another ingredient beyond oak. We could as well talk about how big is the barrel. Where is it stored? How warm is it? How much does that temperature change? Each of those are factors here. Dave, if you don't mind, reveal.
Sure. I can't emphasize enough. The time in oak is a massive deal, and probably the most noteworthy thing about WhistlePig is its finish. WhistlePig's finish is so long it needs its own zip code, and that finish, that caramel, butterscotch, and vanilla finish, is strictly a result of the barrel program that we go through in order to get there. Some months ago, we coordinated and transshipped product. So WhistlePig went to France, and Pierre Ferrand Cognac came to WhistlePig. Now remember, we have two different kinds of barrels. We've got barrels that were once used bourbon that have then since been repurposed for the second phase of our maturation. And then we've got brand new barrels. The barrel that we used for this product was a brand new barrel that had never seen bourbon. It had only seen the WhistlePig. So we emptied the WhistlePig out, and we did a wet fill. So what we've got is the barrel it was a brand new barrel, so there's about 5% of what we put in the barrel gets soaked into the wood. So there's a fair amount of WhistlePig that's soaked into the wood. I'll liken it to, let's say you had a gallon jug of milk and you poured out the gallon jug and you set it down. After you come back a few minutes later, there's a little pool of milk in the bottom. And so that extra film of whiskey was allowed to remain on the wood. So once we filled those, then we put it up in the rafters in the barn, and so that it could get as much heat cycling as possible. At this stage, it's only been in the barrel a couple weeks now. So again, we're in the middle of the process. There's still a lot more extract and reaction to go before we're done, but this is kind of an indicative.
Yeah, I think I would add, I threw that slide up there so we can talk about color change in beverage as it sits in barrel. And we're talking about differing barrel processes, okay? That's clearly not wine barrel making, nor is it cognac barrel making, okay? That's for something else, right? And it provides us, with a barrel that looks like that on the inside, whereas a barrel that is classic for use in wine or in cognac is going to be toasted. So that's no small difference. And clearly that, I think, is reflected here. What's interesting also to consider, and to turn the floor over to these two gentlemen to talk about, is how American oak and European oaks will provide differing levels of tannin.
The difference, really, the way we look at it about what an American barrel is going to add and what a French barrel is going to add. And there's always the guys who like the humid cellar aging and the dry cellar aging, or the American barrels or the French barrels. And I'm always the guy who says, why, what do we have to choose? What brings what? American oak brings in, and I speak under David's control, of course, but brings a lot of vanillin and also coconut. Two flavors that, frankly, I was nervous about the cognac, because that's not necessarily something that's a classic, in terms of expression. Now, French barrel brings a lot, doesn't have that level of vanillin. We have just a little bit. Vanillin is a component that tastes a little bit like vanilla. That's why it's called like that. But we have much more tannins. It brings structure, but a certain level of sweetness as well, depending on the toasting. Now, there's charring, and toasting is very different. In France, because we benefit from the wine making also and the cognac making, barrels, the way they're toasted, they're toasted to many different levels. The speed of toasting matters. So all this, because that way you can develop specific tastes. I'm trying to bring not only this little cognac finish, which we're more, and cognac works more, I think you would agree, on the subtlety notes, but also I want to bring in some of that structure of the tannins.
And we are looking at different aspects from the wood, because we've got char, they've got toast, and there are certainly different things that happen. One of the things that we can get a fair amount of depending upon how you char the barrel, is as one of the wood components breaks down, it releases organic acids, and time for us is about things like those organic acids extracting from the wood and then chemically reacting with the various alcohols to form esters. So what we would expect, as we let the experiment progress, is that berry flavors would start to develop, and perhaps even a little banana note. While time for them is about the tannin extraction and the breaking down of the tannins to their various components, for us, there's still some tannin that comes out, but not nearly as much. But having time for the organic acids to come out, and then more importantly, to have time for those organic acids to react, helps to round out the taste profile for us.
Not only do you note the pepperiness of the the aromas, and how it's pretty much that overt barrel character is already showing in both beverages, that there's a differing weight on the tongue and a differing way in which it responds with flesh. I mean, tannin, if you will, responds to flesh. What do we always talk about with big tannic wines? We're going to stick it with a nice red piece of meat. Why? Because it likes fat and protein. To his point, and I do think that it's always important to imagine this particularly about the difference between American oak and European oaks, is that American oaks tend to be very overt right at the beginning, but tend to lose a lot of that overt character very quickly, whereas European oak barrels don't have a lot of overt character, but hang on to what they have a little bit longer. So time is of the essence when it comes to this project, and we're just seeing a glimpse of what is possible here. I'll turn the floor over to Ryan for a few minutes, if I may.
I was really excited when I first heard about the concept of this whole experiment. Mainly because we're talking about two categories of spirit in the world, especially cognac, but rye as well, that has to follow very strict guidelines, and it has very strict requirements as far as what goes into the bottle. There's one drink that I think really kind of carries the torch as far as marrying these two and showcases just how well these two ingredients, cognac and rye whiskey, go together, and that's the Vieux Carre, which is for a long time a long lost classic, where it's equal parts of cognac, rye whiskey, sweet vermouth, and then 2 kinds of bitters, the Peychaud's and Angostura. So it's a really great example of how well these two play together, and could even be looked at as sort of a baseline for doing things like this and showcasing, you know, well, why not, you know, throw these spirits in the other barrel? You know, they obviously work well together, and people love that drink. I mean, that drink has just blown up all across the world, not just here in New Orleans. So it's a great example of how well they play together. But I want to talk about, you know, taking that as sort of a template and using it as creative fuel for applying that concept to other cocktails. So the sidecar, number 1 and number 2. First off, the first one, what we did was the classic sidecar recipe, if you were to go buy the book, so to speak, would be 2 ounces of cognac with 3/4 ounce each of lemon and Curacao. And in this case, we are using Pierre Ferrand dry Curacao. And you can use Cointreau, you can use triple sec, but I don't recommend it. I would say use Pierre Ferrand dry Curacao because it's an amazingly versatile ingredient. If I can digress for a second, in my bars in Kansas City, we pretty much use Pierre Ferrand dry Curacao for everything, whether it's a margarita or a sidecar or anything that calls for it. It's just it's a wonderful ingredient, one of the best gifts to the bartending community I've seen in a long time. It's fantastic. So the classic recipe of the sidecar, 2 ounces cognac and 3/4 each of lemon and Curacao. I've always loved the sidecar, but I also feel like it, you know, when you follow that recipe, it's fairly austere. It's fairly tart, fairly dry. And the reason that you've got the sugar rim on that cocktail is so that the guest can have the option of sweetening it up. And you'll notice that in the martini glasses up here, there's only a half rim of sugar, and I like to do that as a common practice because maybe some people want it to be more tart, you know, and they don't want sugar on the rim. So we would just rim half the glass, and so it gives the guest the option of sweetening it or not, either way. But I also personally feel like it needs a little bit more sugar in the drink, and so I usually put just a hair of simple syrup in the drink just to sweeten it or round it out a little bit. And one interesting thing is that over the years I've noticed that, you know, adding sugar to a cocktail doesn't necessarily sweeten it or balance it, which is, you know, what you want to do, but it sometimes creates it makes some of the flavors pop. You know, it actually carries flavor with it, and when you add it, it doesn't necessarily make you think, oh, that's sweeter. All of a sudden you're like, oh wait, I taste the orange more, or I taste this more. And so it has a really fantastic practical application in that regard as far as like creating flavors and making certain things stand out. But on to the recipes here. So the first sidecar, what we did was we used 1.5 ounces of cognac and 1/2 ounce of rye. So, you know, I'm going to kind of leave it up to you guys to taste these and you know, come to your own conclusions as far as like what that does to the drink. But obviously, cutting back on the cognac and supplementing that with a little bit of rye whiskey is going to dry it out a little bit. Now, there is a little bit of simple syrup in the drink, just so you know, and it's a very, very small amount. But if you taste that in comparison to number 2, which would be the other way around, 1.5 ounces of rye and 1/2 ounce of cognac, there's obviously going to be a difference. You're going to get more spicy notes from the rye. You're going to get less sweetness. It's going to be a little bit more stout, mainly because of the alcohol content. Keep in mind that the WhistlePig is 100 proof. And, you know, I think, you know, you can talk about the historical connections here and how well they play together, but, you know, I think that bartenders, you know, when you're coming to an event like this and you're trying to come away with something, you want to leave with something practical that you can apply behind the bar. And one thing that you know, I both love and hate about the way our industry has gone is that, you know, we're all geeked out about these classic recipes and we want to do them perfectly, but, you know, there's a lot of room for innovation and creativity too. I mean, at the end of the day, we just want to make a great drink and make our guests happy. So if your guest maybe wants their sidecar a little bit more dry or a little bit more spicy, why not put a little rye whiskey in there, you know?
Yeah, and I would jump in just to say, for me, you know, glass number one, there's a new dimension that's been added to my sidecar, which is otherwise, let's face it, kind of a sped up, industrialized brandy crusta. It was like, look, how can I take all the work out of it, brandy crusta, you know, of this town, and make it a little simpler? And the Parisians, I guess, wanted to go faster, right? Well, so glass number one, to me, adds a new dimension. Glass number two, like I said, I'm a little hypersensitive bitter. It seems to go bitter to me. It's like the spiciness adds up to the lemon and turns it into, now I feel like I'm chewing on a lemon rind. You know, the bitterness of acidity, if you will, which is, frankly, let's be honest, an oxymoron. I know, I get that. But there's something about those two elements, the bitterness of something in that whiskey and the spiciness of the rye and the tartness of the lemon that come together and make it kind of go, "Arr." Now, as Ryan's saying, maybe that makes you happy, but I just thought I would toss out my ideas of what's happening there to say a little bit goes a long ways. You may be having a different experience and saying, no, actually, that has weight on my tongue. It feels interesting. But that's the one other thing I wanted to add. There's a difference, in my opinion, in the way the two feel on the tongue. And I'll leave it at that to say that European barrels have this tannic base, and the whiskey, you know, however Dave wants to explain the difference thereof, but the whiskey has this overtness, but it's not the same tannic weight on the tongue. It's spice, it's pepper, it's soot, it's smoke, it's all that stuff.
You know, face it, we're a whiskey drinking country, and I'm from Kansas City, and we're definitely a whiskey drinking city, but I don't think that, you know, that we're isolated in that regard. I mean, frankly, selling cognac drinks can be really challenging. You know, it is, we have a hard time putting a cognac drink on the menu and moving through a lot of it, but you know, these are absolutely fantastic cognacs and they make really great drinks. And I think if you think in the context of putting rye and cognac together to give a little different spin on a classic cocktail, it might be a way for you to increase your sales of cognac and get people turned onto a new spirit category by kind of easing them into it by merging it with something that they're already used to. So it's a great way to help push those sales and get those out there and alter a classic cocktail just a little bit. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great to take those classic recipes and mix them up a bit.
Dave, do you mind helping us understand a little more about what you think barrel expression is really like, and how you're trying to adapt your methods to various versions of barrel expression? Because I think the point here is that there's a lot more going on here than we just switched out barrels.
Truly, you know, I'm having a lot of fun nowadays with barrels that I didn't get to have when I was at Maker's Mark. You know, when you're working for a single big brand, you pretty much, your job is just make it, damn it, and there's not a lot of room for just playing around. But now that I've kind of stepped out of that mantle and I'm in the realm of a large sandbox, we get to play a lot. And one of the things but I wanted to learn about extracts and what you can get from what you can expect from different kinds of barrels. So I set up a little experiment in my garage, which is not a registered DSP, and started with everything from 1 liter barrels on up, and loaded them with everything you can imagine. I mean, I put a high rye bourbon, a high wheat bourbon, I even put a chocolate porter stout whiskey in some, yeah, it is, by the way, and even put vodka in one. Heaven forbid. But and then for weeks and weeks went through and tasted and made notes on what extracts could be expected and how long you could leave it in a barrel before you absolutely ruined it. And fortunately, the 1 liter barrels, you could only leave it in about 6 weeks before it was absolutely worthless. But before that, you can get an incredible amount of coconut. And what I found is that it's possible expensive, but possible to interleave flavors just by putting it in one barrel, leaving it for an amount of time, then taking it out of that barrel, putting it into another barrel, leaving it for an amount of time, and adjusting the char level certainly helps dramatically. Whether, you know, a light number 3 char is going to give you a lot more, if you have enough time, it's going to give you a lot more of the berry character than if you have a heavy number 4, just because of how much of the organic acids get volatilized versus how much of it remains in the wood. So we were able to really establish fairly substantial amounts of data about how long you can expect to leave different spirits in wood and what characteristics you can pull out. And now some of the folks that I work with are beginning to play with that. And we actually have one malt whiskey that's actually been released that's seen 5 different barrels during its maturation cycle, and we're pretty proud of it. But so there's a lot to be had there, and I guess it would be appropriate at this stage to also say this really got us thinking at WhistlePig, and so once we sobered up completely after realizing that we'd agreed to do this, the next step was, well, gee, okay, we're going to find out what WhistlePig is like in a cognac barrel, but how about in a Pedro Jimenez barrel? How about in an Olorosa sherry barrel? How about in a Sauterne barrel? How about in a Madeira barrel? And so we have had a rather large number of different casks shipped over to us so that we can begin loading them up and experimenting. And our next, I'm fairly certain that our next Boss Hog release is going to be a finished product from one of the casks that we've been working on, because we think we've landed on a really nice finishing program, and we look forward to successful results on not just on the cognac, but on a number of different finishing techniques as a result of starting it here.
It's and I've studied a lot of the techniques where people, it's like the magic pill. You're gonna eat it and you're never gonna die. Like they all tell you. And there's no magic pill for speeding up, and I think that's what David was saying. But this has been tried for hundreds of years. Micro-oxygenation, for example. There was a way where people were trying at the time, and it actually serves a purpose. I found drawings from the old days where people were pulverizing spirit into a bowl of oxygen. It looks like an old machine, but they were thinking about this back then to try to speed up aging. What I love, when you travel, you go to the Caribbean. I spent quite a lot of time in the distilleries there. You go there and they say, oh, you're from Cognac. Well, what's the angel share in Cognac? Right, 2.5%. Oh, here in the Caribbean, tropical aging, and I love rum, by the way. Some of you know I make plantation rum. They say, well, in the Caribbean, thank you. So they say, well, in the Caribbean, it's 6%. We age twice as much than you guys. And then I go to Kentucky and I go say, David. And then I'm asking, and they're saying, we have differences of temperature. Not only temperature, but thermal differences has a very important role on the aging. It's actually a technique that was coined by a guy called Monnet. We have the founder of Europe is Jean Monnet. He's a politician of the time. His great-grandfather was, if more in my book, more interesting man who coined several cognac techniques called tranchage. If you expose the spirits to different temperature, you actually integrate tannins better. For the bartenders, by the way, if you do barrel aging, if you feel like it's not right, the tannins are not well integrated, take the barrel outside in the winter, provided you live in a cold country, and then bring it back inside. You'll integrate tannins, for example. That's a technique called tranchage. You integrate tannins very well. Some people use micro-oxygenation with the micro-bubbling. You can use an aquarium cane, but that's the same thing. All these techniques are sold to you as a cellar master as the magic bullet. And I have news for everyone, and David knows, there's no magic bullet. There is none. There's no substitute for time. And I sometimes cringe, when sometimes, because of course people taste oak, and sometimes it triggers something in your mind. It's oakier than it's older. But really not. You're just giving more oak, but not more age. So it's all about the oxidation of the fatty esters through the wood, and there's no substitute with time. Now, it doesn't mean we cannot research, like you were saying, the saching, the restaving, like we're talking at Ferrand, rechanging the staves, or, using a small barrel. What you will going to be doing is adding a lot of wood. Really, that's what you do. And what we're trying to do in Cognac is have the grapes, the wine. Cognac is nothing else than the essence of wine. When you distill cognac, we always have to remember, I read a lot of books on cognac, and most of them drive me nuts, I have to tell you, because, some books starts and they say, great cognac is made with shitty wine, you know, or something like this. It sounds like this to me anyway. And it's not written like that. But really, and I said, look around you. You have all these vineyards. We're trying to make a very specific wine, low in alcohol, to to concentrate through distillation. Just think about it. A 30-year-old cognac takes 50 bottles of wine to produce 1 bottle of cognac. And when you drink cognac, you should feel this. You know, it should feel effortless, but yet you should feel this. And so we are very careful with the wood adding. We're very careful with, and that's why we are that law in cognac. We can reuse barrel, we restave barrels. And when we distill, you know, cognac ages a long time. We are now distilling some of the cognac we set aside for the next generation to sell. Thank God the old guys did that for us, so, you know, otherwise we'd be broke, right? But really, and in that case, these cognacs will never see new wood. We'll never see new wood. Because, of course, you've got just enough. What you need is the time. So I guess that's that take, you know, of wood. You have to be very careful. Where I agree with David, it's all about what you want to do. What do you want to achieve? If you want to work quick, if you want to add like wood flavors or not. And I do like the delicacies of a drink. You know, so in that sense, that's my take, you know, very careful with new wood and very careful with very small barrels. We think, you know, we don't use 220s like 200 liters for, like you guys in bourbon. We use usually 320 in cognac for the reason of having enough aging, but not too much where you're going to overshadow the spirits. And by the way, that's the reason where most aging cellars should never be underground. Like for wine, they're underground, but they're above ground, because these differences of temperature are very important. So you go to Kentucky, tranchage says we speed up aging, one aspect of aging. But, you know, there's many things happening in the barrel. And we still find new things every year, you know, what's happening in the barrel.
You know, in essence, we've thrown a whole bunch of stuff out there, but we'll, you know, no pun intended, distill it down again because, we need to. But first we need to talk about these cocktails. Ryan, do you mind talking about the two Vieux Carre?
Yeah, so the Vieux Carre, the classic recipe that everybody knows and loves, is equal parts each of cognac, rye whiskey, sweet vermouth, bar spoon of Benedictine, and a couple dashes each of Peychaud's and Angostura bitters. What we did with these two examples right here was we took that recipe and we just cut back on the rye on the first one, and so it's cognac heavy. The first one is 1.5 ounces of cognac with a ½ ounce of rye. And then the second one is the other way around. It's flipped. It's 1.5 of rye and a ½ ounce of cognac. And I think if you smell them and taste them side by side, I think the difference is pretty dramatic. I mean, you know, the first one, you get a lot of sweetness, you get a lot of richness. And whether or not you like the first one better or the second one better, that's entirely a matter of opinion. It's not right or wrong either way. But this is also, you can take this conversation further by saying, you know, why not do the same thing in a Sazerac or a Manhattan or a mint julep or an old fashioned? You know, you can do this with so many different drinks and incorporate these two different spirits. You know, if you have a guest sit at your bar and they say, well, I don't like Sazeracs, it's too harsh. Well, maybe they've only had it, you know, with 100 proof rye and really dry. You know, why don't you say, well, maybe I'll put a little cognac in there? And frankly, that's my favorite way to make a Sazerac. When I have guests sit at my bar, I usually let them know. Most of the times I'll say, you know, if you don't mind, I'm going to make it with equal parts bonded rye and Pierre Ferrand 1840, and I just think it makes the best damn Sazerac that you're ever going to have. It's beautiful. I mean, if you're going to take some liberties with some of these classic recipes like this, when we went rye heavy on the second one, I also cut back the bitters just a little bit. Keep in mind that the rye, again, is 100 proof. It's much, much drier naturally than the cognac. So if you use the same amount of bitters, it might just be a little bit over the top. So again, you want to strive to have a balanced drink and something that's going to, you know, be cohesive and a great final product. So it gives us room to be flexible, to be creative, but keep in mind when you plug in some of these other ingredients, you might have to compensate in other areas to make sure that it comes out just perfectly. So we did cut back the bitters on the second one. We left it at the 2 dashes apiece on the first one.
And so where this drives us to the point that we thought that this was maybe interesting beyond the fact that you're watching a couple of products be developed in real life in front of you. Before we're done, I'd certainly like both these gentlemen to tell us what they expect to happen next and what they intend to do next with these products, and whether more experimentation is available to them or on their short list. The question really becomes, what should happen in these great categories, the categories of European brandy, the category of French brandy, i.e. also cognac, and what should happen with regards to whiskey? The craft distillery world is opening up, or at least making a lot of changes in our expectations of what a whiskey is and how it is finished. And as Dave explained at the outset, that's kind of their charge. The question is, to me, marketing, or I should say rules, rules that provide direction for production, rules that limit production methods are not just for production, they're also for marketing. That's really why they were established in the first place, so that someone could say, when I pick this up, I expect certain standards to be met, I expect certain flavors to be provided to me, and then henceforth, I will trust the name cognac when I see it. I will trust the words straight bourbon whiskey or straight rye whiskey when I see it. And what we're opening up is a can of worms. The worms are calling out, doing that. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. I'm going to do everything I want to do. So I'm not giving any, not providing much direction for you guys to talk about this. But how do you feel about and I'd start with you, Alexandre, because you're the one who's most constrained. Yeah, exactly. I put him on the spot. But he is the one who's most constrained by rules. So are you intending to push further in this direction?
Well, you're speaking with a French guy who lives with all these rules, making cognac. By the way, it's 23 pages long, the rules to make cognac. And I gotta say, most of the requirements make sense. That's why cognac is cognac. Cognac can only be distilled, I said earlier, in a pot still on an open flame, naked flame. Most people gave it up. They say, you guys are insane. Naked flame distillation, you know what happens? You burn down the farm every 100 years. That's what happened to us. Is it really worth it? Just so you guys can drink a good spirit, we burn down the farm, By the way, last time that happened, that Ferrand was in 1913. So somebody, so we have our fingers. I'm a little superstitious. So then you have to be right next to that still 24 hours a day. Why? No way to computerize it. But in the end of the day, these rules make the product what they are. So in that sense, that's for the rules. The against the rules are looking at other spirits. Look at rum. Rum, when I started making rum with plantation, I felt like a kid in a candy store. I felt like, is it really, can I really do this? It's like, really? Nobody's gonna say anything? No, okay. And you're sure? And that's what happened, and that's the magic. And really, in the end, I think the key is what you are about. It's education. It's knowing more. And now with means of communication, rules have been made in a time where there was no way to control things. There used to be a time, a Napoleonic law, that was enacted, that was erased just 10 years ago. You couldn't store cognac with any other spirits unless it was separated by a public road. Wonderful rule, wonderful rule. We're like, so you have to have like different cellars. It's just like, that was a Napoleonic law. Finally, we got this erased. They said, come on, this is crazy. And really, this is a true story. So yes, rules are good, but now we have means with computers, ways to think. Because yes, I think when an age statement is in the bottle, it should be true and that should be controlled. A lot of these things, and that open flame distillation, by the way, if there was not a rule, of course, everybody would like, you're crazy, But yes, the guys got together, and God bless them. I was not born, 1947, and said, let's stick to this. Cognac will be, the hell with, we're sticking to this. I have so much respect, and I think you gathered that, for other spirits. A lot of respect for these work. That's why I'm here today, but yes, I think there's something to be said about rules, but they should be able to not be crazy, forget about some of the Napoleonic rules about the streets and stuff, and they should be evolved. They should evolve. And what we're doing here is showing something that may be doing history. Right now, it is illegal to age cognac in anything but a cognac cask. Why? Right now, it was necessary but then this experiment, you tell me, is it something that's meaningful or not? we are putting it on the table. We are not calling it cognac because we have to play by the rules. That's important. But it's on a small scale, it's history in the making. And in the end, you know, it's what your job behind the bar, our job, or you know, behind or in front of the bar, or our job back at the distillery in the Cellar Masters. At the end of the day, it's about creating instants of pleasures. You know, because sometimes we get all wrapped up in what we're doing and we think like we're writing a next treaty. But in the end, it's just for fun, enjoying life, sharing great moments. So, and in that sense, I do appreciate the freedom to be able to do things. And I want to say a big thank you, or maybe thank you to Destiny or Luck or to the bartenders behind the bar. Is 20 years ago, you know, it was kind of tough because behind the bar, there was not such interest about what spirit was made how and what would it do to my drink. This happening to me today. I have to sometimes pinch myself and say, is it really happening? I used to go to bars 20 years ago. People asked me how many T-shirts they would get if, you know, they bought, I sold the bottle.
Hey, have you seen his neon light? It's awesome, man. You got to get one of them.
And I'm not in the textile business.
And the question really, I mean, Dave, do you mind if I kind of toss this your way? Not to put you on the spot on it, rather to say that as we consider loosening rules, is there a way that we can have our cake and eat it too? Can we keep the rules that we like and then come up with new names or whatever the hell we're supposed to do? Because again, this is about marketing. We've got to be able to tell someone what to expect. And right now, when I see the word bourbon, I'm not sure I know what it means anymore.
If you read 27 CFR, which is the governing regulation for spirits made in the United States, which is good bathroom reading, there are tons of regulations in there. And the nice thing about it is that when they amend things, they tend not to take things out, they just add. And I think there's something like 26 different kinds of whiskey defined in there, most of which aren't used and haven't been used forever, for a long, long time. It doesn't take a change in the rules in order to change what you do, because you can throw back to things that were done a long time ago, pre-prohibition. Ryan knows about this. I won't spill beans yet without his permission. But
go ahead.
Okay. We found a pre-prohibition era rule that allows for Ryan to introduce a whiskey that hopefully will be on the market by the end of the year. It totally falls within the realm of the definition of whiskey, but it's a new type and style.
It's not bourbon,
and,
it's not rye,
it's not bourbon, it's not rye, but there's still a rule that allows you to make it. And it's, so...
Y'all have been drinking,
soon,
haven't you?
But the important thing is the rules, while they're prescriptive and while they're deep and wide, there's a lot of space in there to maneuver around and come up with new things, or to come up with old things that people have forgotten about. And at the end of the day, the final arbiter for us is, do you like how it tastes? I love, when a purist comes and attacks me and says, how come you're doing this? Or how come you're aging it that way? Or how come you're doing this? And I just look at him and I said, does it taste good? If it tastes good, it's okay. And that's what we're all about. In American definitions, there's no place for unaged whiskey. Okay? It doesn't exist. Now there's room, in the brandy world, there's eau de vie, and there's immature brandy, and there's brandy. In tequila, there's plata tequila and reposado tequila and añejo tequila. But in American whiskey, there is no definition that permits for unaged whiskey.
And yet we're seeing it all over the place.
And so, but there is a definition that allows for whiskey distilled from a bourbon mash. And that is a type and style of whiskey, which you guys have probably never heard about. What it allows you to do is to start out just like you're making a bourbon, but instead of putting it into a brand new charred oak barrel, you put it into a used barrel. And it can stay there for microseconds. It just so we cut the bung out and put a pipe in the bottom, and we pour it through. We comply with the law that says it has to hit used wood. It's whiskey distilled from a bourbon mash, and it comes out white, and it's legally white
Everybody
whiskey.
feeling a lot better about the rules now? Are you? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
There's a way to do whatever you like, and that's what I like. That's part of the fun of what I do now is I find creative ways to make tasty products that people want to have, and to comply with the government. It's kind of a fun game between me and the TTB right now, and so far it's like Dave 12, TTB 0.
You're the only one having.
Now, I will say, in the TTB's defense, though, when we came out with Hillrock Solera aged bourbon, it's it's America's first ever Solera aged product. We went to the TTB and we proposed it to them. I sent them a treatise that says, here's what Solera aging's all about. They never said no. They said yes, but. And they put a senior analyst on it, 2 in fact. And the first one retired before we got a resolution. 9 months later, after a bunch of give and take, and, well, it says I can do this. Yes, but. Okay, well, it says I can do this. Yes, but. Okay, how about if I do this and this? And finally, I got a letter from the TTB, and it said, and I've got it buried someplace in my email file. It says, congratulations. You have finally successfully negotiated the morass of federal regulations. You may make a product called Solera aged bourbon. And so even though there was no category for it, we still found a circuitous path through the regulations to get it.
If I could add to that just real briefly, I've also had some recent conversations with the TTB kind of along those lines. And generally, the reason they don't say no, the reason they usually end up saying yes is because, like, yeah, we'll let you do it. Just make sure you pay your taxes. You can do whatever you want, but we'll figure out a way to help you out as long as you pay us what you owe us. That's, at the end of the day, I mean, that's what they want.
So, Alexandre, with the BNIC or whomever you're going to be dealing with, how can you foresee being able to create products like this as brandies, not as cognac?
The regulations, you're right, are very, very strict, but they evolve. They evolve very slowly. I give you an example. Right now with global warming, we are thinking, we're researching, we're active at Ferrand with this. What is going to be the grape variety where our kids are going to use or our grandkids are going to be using? Now, we are thinking about grape varieties that are not allowed right now, but we're trying to discuss about what should be used. And we might even use certain hybrids, and hybrids are not allowed for as you know, AOCs. Because cognac is regulated with BNIC. Cognac, Tales of a Cocktails, how many people this year? 22,000, something like this. The little village of Cognac is 18,000. So when I come here, I'm like a deer in the sunlight. There's more people here, and definitely more drinking, than here than in Cognac, even though we drink our fair share. And no, for us, it's the Angels. The Angel share in Cognac is about 30 million bottles. But really, we're looking at the different grape varieties that we're going to be looking at. So if you look in the scheme of things, for 500 years, the laws have been evolving. And it takes, what David was explaining, whether it is America or in France, we have, I think, all in all, good administrations that listen. And I am for rules in a sense that it's like when you play a game. You need rules as long as everybody agrees that they can evolve. And also, to the point of David as well, know your rules, study the rules, because if they're that thick, or you can actually go back and find historical elements that can be revisited and support a new way to look at it. I always say, you were talking about the taste disappearing. I think the Great Recession, 1929, was a time where, we were more worried about surviving than drinking good stuff. And I think the quality of drinks has suffered since then. And 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I think it's went through circles. Now we have all these different expressions. And I think we're going to go back on that path of researching things and I think it's about keeping things alive. But I will vouch to what David said, but I want to say 2 things on this. I said, first of all, we just have to have the discipline to not blur the message about what we are doing.
Amen.
If we are doing cognac, this is cognac, and that's, in that sense, yes, I am a purist. And I think David is, and I think we all are. Because once you start, you know, for example, if a gin tastes like an aquavit, it should be called an aquavit and not a gin anymore. I do think, for example. It doesn't make it a bad product, it's just be, you know, should be knowing where it belongs. So to me, that's my first point. And my second point is only a repeat of what David said at the end of the day is, do you like it? Does it taste good? Does it give you pleasure? And I want to thank, you know, all the bartenders for their passion and their hard work, because this is for you that we are doing this. You keep us doing it with the same, you know, the passion that we have. So I want to toast to you guys for that. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking the gentlemen on the dais. Alexandre Gabriel, Dave Pickerell, Ryan Maybee. Thank you all very much.